8:39 here, Big 550 KTRS. Graham Renz joins us, policy researcher at the Show Me Institute. Good morning, Graham.
Good morning, McGraw.
Have you seen Vision Quest yet?
I plead the fifth.
My goodness, what are you doing? Your life is not complete till you see that movie. All right, so last week you were on talking about Metrolink and the MLS and the votes. We know that the Metrolink passed and the MLS failed. So now what?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first, I don't know if I'm surprised or not by the results, but a little bit considering how much money especially went to the MLS Stadium Vote Yes campaign. I think ultimately this isn't a vote against MLS in St. Louis. It's a vote against subsidizing stadiums. So it's unfortunate that it looks like MLS won't be coming to St. Louis, although there's a GoFundMe page that I think has about $10,000 now out of $60 million.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but I don't think it's unfortunate that voters and taxpayers didn't buy the rhetoric about drawing millennials and all this sort of stuff.
Well, but hold on a second here, though, because the tax passed. So the Metrolink tax passed, but in that was the business tax to spend for the stadium. So the voters, if we were to take the voters at their infinite wisdom, they wanted to fund the Metrolink and fund the stadium, but not give the authorization to build the stadium, the MLS stadium.
Well, I think, one thing I think MLS proponents were probably a big part of getting the Metrolink question passed, Proposition 1 passed. But I think, there was the authorization for the sales tax for the Metrolink construction, but there wasn't the authorization. Voters didn't approve Prop 2, which would have directed the revenue to the stadium. So
right.
it
wasn't a sales tax, it was a business tax.
Yeah, that's right. So yes to Metrolink, and I think a lot of the yes votes for Metrolink were a lot of yes for soccer too. But ultimately, when voters decided on whether or not to divert the increased use tax revenue to the stadium, they said no. So I think that's a no MLS subsidy.
So Lyda Crewson gets an extra $5 million a year to do anything she wants with it because they passed a tax that they didn't want it to go to where it was said it was going.
Well, where this measure would have redirected it.
Right.
Now, and Mayor-elect has said that she thinks that the new use tax revenue should go to things like public safety, which a lot of the opponents of the stadium were saying, hey, this is what this use tax revenue goes to now. It's what the increased use tax revenue should go to.
Right.
So voters ultimately decided to not divert that revenue.
Right. I am a true believer in the electorate knows what they're doing, right? You can't question the sincerity of the voters. If the voters vote for or against something, you can't extrapolate to say they didn't know what they were talking about. But in this instance, I truly believe that the voters had absolutely no idea what they were talking about when they went to the polls to vote for Metrolink and for the MLS stadium. Because the people who called up the show, now again, I know it's anecdotal, but if you were against the stadium, you voted to fund the stadium, but didn't want the funds to go to the stadium. So it would be like passing a tax to pay for a new football stadium, but not authorizing you to use those funds we just passed for the football stadium to build the football stadium.
I think that's half right. I mean, the sales tax increase, which would have led to a use tax increase, that was for the Metrolink. So saying yes to that, voters weren't saying yes to Metrolink. They said yes in hopes of also saying yes to the stadium diversion of tax revenue. So they said
right,
yes.
Right, but to put it to Metrolink, it would have been like if you voted for the Metrolink tax, but then didn't vote to build the Metrolink. Right? I mean, the funds were in the first Metrolink bill that passed. And then with that use tax, that business use tax, that money was then going to be used to build the MLS stadium, which failed by 3,000 votes. So they voted to fund it, but didn't vote to build it.
Well, they allowed for funding through when
Right.
they passed Prop 1. They allowed for funding. They didn't vote for funding.
Okay,
right.
right.
So I think so. Yeah. So I think
semantics some ways, but I'm not so sure the voters knew what the heck they were voting.
Well,
on.
I think there were a lot of folks who probably voted yes on 1 and yes on 2, and there were a minority of folks who voted yes on one and no on two. And obviously that would get the results we got. And I think, it's just they weren't against having increased revenue, use tax revenue. They were just against that use tax revenue going to the stadium.
Do you think the MLS stadium is a done deal?
The investor group, I won't speculate. I mean, investor group said that they're going to disband and that they don't see a way forward. There's this immediate round of MLS expansion, 2 new teams, and there will be 2 more in a couple of years. So it's not like all hopes are gone.
Well, but I mean, she can, Lyda Cruz, and the mayor of St. Louis, can do anything she wants with that money, right? She could, if she wanted to, she could say, you know what? I want to put it towards a new MLS stadium, right? She can do it at her full discretion.
I'm pretty sure it's general fund, so it would have to go through an allocation process, right? And I don't know if that would be political suicide or not. I mean, I don't do politics, so that would be, at least we can say, quite controversial. So, but these things get funded privately. In San Jose, they have a $100 million stadium that they built with all private funds.
Right.
We've got the investor group pledged $90 million for the stadium. They'd likely get a bunch of free or in-kind land and work from the state. So, it's not like this thing needs to be dead.
Well, we'll see what happens. But I know a lot of people who I'm running into, anecdotally, walking down the street, minding my own business, who don't live in the city, who are crushed that the MLS stadium isn't here. And they keep asking me, it's a no-brainer. It was a win for the city. Why did they vote against it? And it's, I wish they would put it somewhere else, but MLS clearly doesn't want it somewhere else, so we'll just wait and see what happens. So you think this is a move in the right direction?
I think it was a move in the right direction in as much as voters didn't buy the rhetoric of this is going to draw business and millennials, we're going to rejuvenate downtown, this is going to be a boon for the economy. The economic literature is just abundantly clear.
But they did buy the rhetoric for Metrolink, though.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily a win. I don't think that in Grant's perfect world, I don't think things would have turned out how they did here. Hopefully, voters authorized the sales tax for the expansion of Metrolink. Hopefully, in virtue of that, hopefully the thing actually gets built. This new tax will draw in $12 million for Metrolink every year. It's not nearly enough to cover the costs, even with 50% of the capital costs coming from the feds. So Slay's office has even said, if this tax passes, it's going to be 10 years before this thing is going best case scenario.
Right. Assuming it's a perfect world, in 10 years, maybe.
Yeah.
But you still can't do anything without federal funds.
No, and there's transportation legislation at the federal level right now that goes for a few more years. But the Trump administration is going to, have a say in the next transportation legislation at the federal level. And whether that's going to include hundreds of millions of dollars for light rail, I don't know. I'm unsure. It's certainly going to have a lot of infrastructure investment. That's what he said. But whether it goes to transit, that's unclear.
And the other thing I know, just thinking about it, you got to wonder what the world's going to look like in 15 years. Are you really going to need offices? Are you really going to need to get people from North City to South City?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the people taking Uber for ambulances to the hospital now.
Yeah, I think and I think that worry is especially acute for light rail, right? Because it goes in and it doesn't move anywhere. You can't move it.
Right.
Light rail went through downtown, right? Laclede's Landing when it was booming, and now it's not booming anymore. But the light rail still goes there. The transit goes there, and transit is for folks who really need the help, who need help getting to work, getting to school, these things, and having this really rigid transportation system that doesn't respond to economic conditions like, say, buses or bus rapid transit can, you leave folks stranded. And it's unfortunate, and hopefully that doesn't happen with more Metrolink. It's going through probably the parts of the city that need transportation investment. It's going to North City where folks use transit, but it's unclear if this is going to be the right kind of transit to get them where they need to go.
Really is an interesting. It was an interesting vote, and the world changed, and we're going to act accordingly. But I'm not so sure it was the smartest vote of all. Graham Renz, policy researcher at the Show Me Institute. More online?
Yep, more online at showmeinstitute.org.
Will you do yourself a favor and go see Vision Quest?
You know, I think if I come back for the third time, not having seen it,
I mean, what is your affinity? Why don't you want to watch this wonderful movie that'll change your
I don't
life?
want to watch it. Honestly, I'm just not a movie guy. So sitting down and committing 2 hours to something, it's just, I don't know.
Do yourself a favor. 8:50, Big Fat